You think you know your life. You think you know your family. The stories whispered at holiday dinners, the faded photographs in the attic, the crest that hangs framed, gathering dust, a symbol of some forgotten ancestry. But what if all of it, the lineage, the history, the very soil beneath your feet, was a carefully constructed lie? This isn't just a tale of coincidence. This is a terrifying unraveling. This is Forgotten Ties, and trust me, you are not ready for the knot we're about to untangle. Meet Elara Vance. 42 years old, a curator at a small but prestigious history museum in Rhode Island. Her life was measured, almost architectural in its precision. Crisp linen shirts, a perfectly organized apartment overlooking the bay, and a meticulously researched family tree that dated back to the American Revolution. The centerpiece of that history, the undisputed crown jewel, was the Vance family crest, a coiled silver serpent wrapped around a broken shield, a design so obscure, so specific, only a handful of genuine historical records confirmed its existence. To Elara, it wasn't just a symbol, it was her legacy, a proof of who she was, a connection to every ancestor who ever bore the name. She even had a small, discreet replica, a delicate, custom-made silver pin she wore religiously on her lapel, a secret handshake with the ghosts of her past. She was in Chicago for a conference, the kind of professional gathering where academics traded politely dismissive critiques of each other's footnotes. It was late, the final night, and the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and desperation for the hotel bar. Elara, ever the historian, was in the lobby, waiting for her cab, lost in a dull, intellectual haze. That's when he walked in. He was a presence. Early 50s, maybe. Not conventionally handsome, but rugged, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of too many long roads. He wore a worn leather jacket, a stark contrast to the tweed and corduroy of the conference attendees. He stopped to speak to the concierge, his back partially to her. And then he shifted. Just a slight movement, the turning of an arm as he gestured toward the door. The overhead chandelier caught the light, and it wasn't the leather or the deep lines around his eyes that seized Elara's breath. It was the ink. It wasn't a small piece, not a quick, drunken sketch. It dominated his forearm, stretching from wrist to elbow. It was stark, black, and incredibly detailed. And as Elara's eyes, trained for decades in the meticulous study of heraldry, focused, the world outside her vision began to blur. The serpent. The shield. The precise, almost impossible to replicate coils of the silver viper. It was the Vance family crest. Exact. Flawless. The very same symbol she wore, tiny, on her lapel, the one only her family, their lawyers, and a few historians knew existed in such detail. A cold, visceral panic seized her. This wasn't a popular design. This wasn't some generic medieval symbol. This was hers. It was the insignia of her lineage, a mark of her blood. She felt a tightening in her chest, a primal alarm blaring. A million explanations flashed through her mind. A historical enthusiast, a bizarre coincidence, an art thief who specialized in family emblems, but none of them felt right. The tattoo was old, clearly not a recent impulse. The lines faded just enough to suggest years, perhaps decades, of being carried on that skin. She watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird desperate for flight. The man finished his conversation and turned fully, walking directly toward the glass doors. This was her moment. Let him walk out and forever wonder, or take the terrifying leap. Her historian's curiosity, the relentless drive for truth, won out over her fear. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper she barely recognized. He stopped, turning slowly. His eyes, when they met hers, were an astonishing, deep sapphire blue, a color that felt strangely, sickeningly familiar. "Yes?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, an accent she couldn't immediately place. Not New England, not Southern, something unrooted. Elara felt the silver pin on her lapel, suddenly heavy, a burning weight. She lifted her own arm, pointing, her hand trembling. "That," she breathed out, the single word hanging in the cavernous lobby. "On your arm. That, crest." Where did you get that? The man looked down at the tattoo, then back at Elara, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to something far colder, far more calculating. A muscle twitched in his jaw. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was a direct, impossible confrontation. A silence fell between them, so thick it felt like physical pain. It was the silence before an earthquake, the moment the earth decides to split open, and Elara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the answer he was about to give would not just be a secret revealed, but the total annihilation of the life she thought she knew. In that moment, standing in the middle of the Chicago hotel lobby, time seized. Everything about Elara's life, the woman whose career was built on the undeniable truth of history and lineage, suddenly felt as fragile as glass. The stranger's eyes, that deep sapphire blue, never left hers. As he gazed at the crest on her lapel, a cold, scornful half-smile played on his rugged face. "You want to know where I got it?" His voice, Silas, finally cut through the air, deeper now, laced with years of practiced contempt. "It's not a souvenir, lady. It's not a piece of history you found in a dusty box. It's blood." He raised his arm, letting the tattoo of the silver serpent and the broken shield catch the glare of the chandelier. "I didn't get it. I am it. I've carried it on my skin since I figured out I wasn't the man the official records said I was." Elara swallowed hard, her throat raw with fear. "I don't understand. This crest belongs to my family. It's the Vance lineage. This specific design, it is proprietary. Only a few official drawings exist. You have to tell me, where did you copy it from?" Silas shook his head, a slow, weary movement. "You're Elara Vance, aren't you?" That hit was more surprising than the tattoo. "How do you know my name?" "I saw your name on the conference poster. Elara Vance, curator of the Vance Historical Legacy. Did you really think things like that stayed secret forever?" He took a step closer, forcing Elara to instinctively retreat. "You're the legitimate heir, aren't you? The one who got everything?" The Newport house, the career built on fairy tales and the revered name. He paused, those blue eyes sweeping over her with an intensity that made her feel naked. "This thing," he tapped the tattoo, "it has a formal name, doesn't it? Do you know it?" Elara, with the instinct of a historian, almost automatically supplied the answer. "Serpens sepultus." The buried serpent. That's what the elders called it, because of the story of an ancestor who was buried alive for betrayal. Silas laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Not for some ancient ancestor's betrayal, Elara. It's for your father's." The air rushed out of Elara's lungs. "That's enough," she hissed, trying to hold on to the last shreds of her dignity. "My father was a man of honor. He died 20 years ago. He was a symbol of integrity. Don't invent lies about him." Silas suddenly dropped his voice, leaning in dangerously close. He was William Vance. He had a tiny, port-wine birthmark, a half-moon shape, right behind his left ear. And he loved a woman named Corinne. A woman with no pedigree, no fortune, whom he met on a clandestine trip to the Mexican border back in the 70s. She was my mother. Elara's mind reeled. The name Corinne was not in any of her family records. There was no border trip. Her father, William Vance, had married her mother, Sarah, a Boston socialite, right out of college. It was a clean, perfect history. "You're making this up," Elara whispered, but inside her, the wall was beginning to crack. "I wish I was," Silas said, a flicker of pain crossing his face before the hard cynicism returned. "My mother had no inheritance, but she had something more valuable to some Vances. She had proof. When she died 10 years ago in a South Texas hospital, she gave me an old leather wallet. Inside was this tattoo, sketched in pencil, and a thin, yellowed piece of paper." Silas peeled back his leather jacket, revealing a faint, white scar, barely visible, right above the wrist of the tattooed arm. "This is where she said my father cut his hand when they swore their vows. And this is what the paper said." Silas produced a heavily folded, brittle piece of paper, sealed in plastic film. Under the light, Elara could see the old, strong handwriting. She knew that script. It was William Vance's. The note simply read, "Serpens sepultus. She is yours. Never forget." My mother translated it, Silas said, his breathing heavy. She said she was me. William Vance knew she was pregnant. He promised he would come back, would acknowledge me and give me the name. But then he vanished. Completely. She tried to reach out, but the letters were returned. Your family cut her out, Elara. Not just out of affection, but out of existence. The convergence of the family crest, the name William Vance, and that handwriting was beyond coincidence. Elara felt her entire internal landscape plummeting. Corinne, the secret child. Her entire life built on that lineage, and now it was just an empty shell. But the detail that chilled her most was something else. Elara, too, had a physical trait her family often called a rare Vance feature. She had a tiny, comma-shaped scar, milky white, just under her right collarbone, not from an injury. She had always dismissed it as a quirk. Show me something, Elara demanded, her voice now a desperate plea. It might not be related. Do you have any strange birthmarks or markings anywhere that you don't think is a scar? Silas raised an eyebrow, suspicion mixed with curiosity. He hesitated, then pulled the collar of his leather jacket down, exposing the area just below his right collarbone, near the shoulder. And there, under the faint light, Elara saw it. A tiny, comma-shaped, milky white scar. The exact, perfect match of her own. It was impossible. Not just the crest. Not just the secret father. It was a biological mark, a genetic code that only two people of direct, shared blood could share so precisely. Silas was not an imposter. He was her brother. The world around Elara exploded into a fierce, deafening buzz. William Vance, the man of honor, hadn't just betrayed one woman. He had betrayed two families. He had erased his own flesh and blood and built Elara's entire life on a lie shrouded by a fake family crest. The truth, when it lands, is not like a sudden clap of thunder. It is the slow, agonizing collapse of everything you believed. For Elara, the moment of recognizing the comma-shaped scar beneath Silas's collarbone as the exact match of her own, a genetic signature the Vance family had always mistakenly taken as a unique family characteristic, was annihilation. This man was not a stranger. He was her flesh and blood. He was living proof of her father's most horrific deception. They couldn't stay in Chicago. Both knew this story was too large, too dangerous to be discussed over thin hotel walls. 2 days later, they met at a discreet cafe in Providence, Rhode Island, close to where Elara worked, close to the Vance historical archives, and close to the grave of the man she had once revered. My father. William, Elara said, her voice raw, every word a stone of unbearable weight. He built everything on perfection. My career, my mother's respect, the family's social standing. He told the story of Serpens Sepultus as an ancient honor fable about an ancestor redeeming a wrong. But in reality, he created a living replica of his own betrayal. Silas sat across from her, drinking black coffee slowly, as if savoring a bitter medicine. My mother, Corinne, told a different story. She didn't want money. She just wanted him to acknowledge me, to give me the name at least. That crest, he pointed to his arm, she saw it on a small, leather-bound family book my father carried. She said, he promised, this is our seal. I will return. But what haunted Silas most wasn't William's abandonment. It was the silence afterward. As I grew up, my mother became obsessed with that crest. She believed it was the key to reclaiming what was stolen. Not affection. Something tangible. She always spoke of the first will and the secret of the East Coast domain. Elara frowned. East Coast domain? The Vance crest was only associated with an old, long-sold estate in New Hampshire. There is no first will, Silas. There is my grandfather's final will from 1985. And it's all legitimate. It left everything to William, and then to me. But what if that will was just a cover-up? Silas looked her straight in the eye, his gaze sharp. My mother wasn't stupid. She was a nurse. She had a degree. She said William had hidden an earlier will, written when he was young and foolish, that acknowledged my mother as a potential heir if they had a son, in order to guarantee she wouldn't reveal some terrible secret. Maybe it wasn't cash, Elara. Maybe it was something your family sacrificed a bloodline to protect. Silas's words planted a terrifying seed of doubt in Elara's mind. As the curator of the Vance legacy, she had access to every Vance historical record, all supposedly catalogued and complete. But what if her father, a trained historian, had the time and the tools to fabricate a false history for his own daughter? "I have to go back to the archives," Elara announced, standing up. "Now, I need to re-examine the original documents from the 70s. I've read them 100 times, but I've never read them in the light of a betrayal." They broke into the Vance historical archives. Elara, with her familiar white gloves, began pulling out musty, brittle boxes of paper. Silas stood by, his tattooed arm astark, living anachronism intruding on her carefully packaged history. In the section for old property transactions, one folder felt conspicuously heavy. It was labeled Property Tax Records 1974 to 1976, a name so mundane no one would ever bother to review it. Elara pulled it out. Most of it was tedious receipts. But at the bottom, tucked between two income tax returns, was a pale blue sheet of paper. It wasn't a will. It was a detailed, handwritten, dated note of a meeting between William Vance and a lawyer named Philip Carstairs, executed in 1977. William's handwriting was unmistakable, and it emphasized, completed the removal of any records pertaining to Corinne S. and her son's claim. The family will has been updated to reflect the sole legitimate lineage. Philip will retain the original earliest will. The shield must be protected. The shield. The family crest. And here was the horrifying part. The lawyer, Philip Carstairs, was not the Vance family attorney. Elara knew the family lawyer, an elderly man who had worked for her grandfather. Philip Carstairs was a criminal defense attorney in Boston, known for handling sensitive cleanup jobs for wealthy families. "He didn't just abandon me, Elara," Silas muttered, reading over her shoulder. "He paid a criminal lawyer to perform a removal. That's a criminal act to cover up an asset or a secret." But what secret? The serpent coiled around the broken shield. Silas said his mother mentioned the secret of the East Coast domain. Elara recalled the old New Hampshire estate. She rapidly flipped through the files, searching for anything related to land or property from the 70s. Finally, she found a misplaced transaction document, a sales contract for the New Hampshire estate. It listed the seller as the estate of W. Vance. But in the fine print, there was a clause Elara had never noticed before. The sale of the estate excludes one singular, unattached fixture, sealed and coated with the Vance family crest. Access to this asset remains reserved for the Vance bloodlines specified in the earliest will, the 1975 will. A singular, unattached fixture, sealed and coated. The entire narrative suddenly ceased to be about emotional betrayal. It was about a hidden treasure, a coded asset. Her father had fabricated a false history, disowned his firstborn son, all to protect something physical hidden deep inside a piece of land the family pretended to sell. "Silas," Elara said, her voice trembling with the magnitude of the realization. "That earliest will. It wasn't about money or land in general. It was the key. Serpens sepultus isn't a symbol, it's a cipher." She pointed to the tattoo on his arm. "Your mother kept her promise. She gave you the map. And now we need to find that lawyer, Philip Carstairs. Because he has the final missing piece of paper. The one our father paid to keep buried." The story was no longer a personal tragedy. It was a pursuit. After leaving the Vance historical archives, which had become the living proof of her own family's deception, Elara and Silas were in a race against time, or perhaps against the very secrets that had been buried. Their singular target, Philip Carstairs, the Boston criminal lawyer who had been hired by William Vance to perform the removal in the 70s. Finding Carstairs proved chillingly difficult. He was retired, his old firm dissolved, every trace wiped clean. It was as if William Vance hadn't just paid to erase Silas from the family history, but had paid to erase the lawyer himself from the public record. Finally, Elara, with the tenacious research skills of a professional historian, located Carstairs, a high-end nursing facility in Massachusetts, where he lived in secluded obscurity. They arrived on a gloomy afternoon, the suspense suffocating. Carstairs was a frail, elderly man, his eyes clouded, but when Silas pulled up his sleeve, exposing the serpens sepultus crest, the buried serpent, the man's eyes suddenly flared, a terrified recognition sparking to life. The shield, Carstairs rasped, his voice weak but laced with fear. William protected it. William promised it was gone for good. Elara wasted no time. She placed the 1977 meeting memo on the table. We know about the earliest will, Mr. Carstairs. We know my father paid you to seal it and erase the existence of his son. We are not here for revenge. We just need to know what the shield is and where it is. Carstairs shook. He had carried the secret for nearly 50 years, a crushing weight. It wasn't a will, not a traditional one, he stammered, his breath rattling. It was a deed of trust. William wrote it in 1975 when he believed he was near death from an accident. It didn't just acknowledge Corinne and Silas as heirs, it revealed the location of the Vance speculum. The Vance speculum. Elara had never heard of it. What is it? Carstairs coughed a long, painful cough. It's not a looking glass. It's a historical artifact believed to have belonged to a high-ranking British official during the American Revolution. It may have been stolen. Its verified value could be tens of millions of dollars. It was sealed in a humidity-controlled vault deep beneath the New Hampshire estate. The fraudulent property sale. The unattached coded fixture clause in the deed. It all clicked. William Vance hadn't just disowned his illegitimate son, he had executed a colossal inheritance fraud. He had retained the most valuable asset, pretended it was sold, and erased the legitimate heir to that asset. Carstairs finally revealed the location of the deed of trust, an old safe deposit box at his defunct legal firm. When they found it, the yellowed trust deed confirmed everything. It not only acknowledged Silas Vance as the sole legitimate heir to the Vance speculum, but contained a hand-drawn diagram, a detailed map of the secret vault's location, coded with symbols taken directly from the serpens sepultus crest. The tattoo on Silas's arm was not a coincidence, it was the key. The coiled silver serpent, the broken shield, each tiny detail corresponded to a landmark or direction in the vault map. Elara and Silas, now reluctant partners bound by their father's ultimate betrayal, were faced with a decision: keep the secret and split the immense fortune, or expose the entire devastating truth about William Vance and the Vance family deception. They chose the truth. Not for the money, but for the absolution. They contacted the authorities and an independent historian. The evidence, Carstairs' deed of trust, the hand-drawn map, and William's falsified property records, was undeniable. The ensuing public investigation shattered the New England socialite class. William Vance's legacy crumbled. The lauded stories of Vance's integrity evaporated. Silas, the man who was erased, was recognized as the legitimate son and heir to the hidden asset. As for Elara, she lost everything: her career, her reputation, and her reverence for her father. But she gained something far more valuable: the truth and a brother. Serpens sepultus, the buried serpent, was no longer a symbol of betrayal, but of resurrection. It had forced them to look into the mirror of harsh reality and build their own family connection, one based on honesty. And that is where we leave it. A dead man, a family crest, and a tattoo that uncovered a betrayal spanning nearly half a century, covered up by the father she once adored. You see, the ties that bind us, they're the only real things. But sometimes, to find that truth, you have to be willing to face the fact that your entire lineage was just a fairy tale told to hide a terrible secret. Silas and my story is a reminder that in every family, there's a moment when the shield breaks. And it's only then that you truly know who you are. If this terrifying, impossible tale of two strangers united by a single, impossible symbol has shaken you to your core, please remember, like this video, subscribe to Forgotten Ties for more stories that tear the curtain away, and definitely hit that notification bell. Because when it comes to the ties that bind us, sometimes, the forgotten ones are the most dangerous and ultimately the most real. Thank you for watching.